Hi everyone, I'm David Scranton, and today we're talking about you, members of the income generation. We'll talk about the unique challenges you face and how investing for income provides the right strategy for meeting those challenges. You guessed it, it's that time again, time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. So why do I call this show the income generation, and just who or what is the income generation? Well, to answer the question, you are the income generation. This is a show by, for, and about today's generation of retirees and near retirees. And that primarily means baby boomers. However, it can also mean older Gen Xers who are also perhaps in your 50s and nearing the age when you might need to start preparing for retirement income. But what exactly makes this the income generation? And why is it so important for our generation to understand the benefits of investing for income compared to, let's say, previous generations? That's exactly the question that we're going to answer right here on today's show. In short, the income generation faces a host of unique challenges, challenges that are different from those faced by our parents and grandparents. We'll explore these challenges and show you how investing for income offers a sound strategy for meeting and for beating them. Specifically, we'll talk about the double-edged sword of longevity and the related challenge of runaway healthcare inflation, the loss of traditional pension plans, and how the game has changed dramatically in the financial markets since the turn of the century. And helping me out, as usual, will be my good friend and income specialist and Amazon best-selling author, Jeff Small. But we're also going to be getting insights from our guest advisors, income specialists such as David Stearns, James Locke, David Wright. But first, let's talk about the trickiest challenge of our generation, and that is the fact that we're living so long. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is over 78 years, and that's compared to a life expectancy of 68 years in 1950. Advances in healthcare have made it possible for people to remain active and to remain productive well past the age of 65. And as a result, you might want to work well past that age, or in some cases, you may not want to retire at all. And this is all great on one hand, but it can also lead to problems, particularly financial problems. So statistically, if you're a couple in your 60s, there is a 50% chance, 50, that at least one of you will live into your 90s. And that means that you're going to need a strategy designed to provide security and retirement for up to 30 years, not 20 years, not 25 years, but income for a full 30 years. So please understand that the average person is capable of thinking and planning no more than 5 to 10 years in the future. Even the average financial advisor that specializes in growth-based strategies can't see much further than that. However, that's where the income model comes in. It's designed specifically to address this double-edged sword of longevity. Why? Because an income specialist does see 30 years ahead, and that helps you prepare for every possible contingency during that time. Some of the contingencies you should consider are planning for Social Security, required minimum distributions, estate planning, family issues, potential health issues, the status of the markets, inflation, healthcare inflation, and many more. Now, I say healthcare inflation because it's different from regular inflation, and it affects retirees in a different way. And unfortunately, that means that it hits them much harder. And that makes the skyrocketing cost of healthcare just another one of the unique challenges facing the income generation. So before I talk with Jeff Small, I'll answer one of your questions on today's topic. So Anna from Ohio says, Dave, longevity runs in my family. In fact, everyone seems to live into their 90s, and it does worry me financially. Will investing for income help me worry less? Anna, the question is 100% yes. Why? Because if you're investing for growth and you're trying to engineer income through taking systematic withdrawals, then essentially you're spending principal and you're always running the risk of running out of money. But by definition, when you invest for income and you spend only your interest and dividends, you keep your principal intact, which means now if you get into your late 80s and you have a healthcare crisis or another reason why you might need to dip in the principal, now you have that principal intact. I can't say it's guaranteed, but it's as close to being assured as you can possibly get anywhere in the financial markets, except for perhaps an FDIC-insured CD. Now, be sure to submit your own questions to Ask Dave by emailing me at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. Now it's time to bring on my good friend, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store in Melbourne, Florida. Jeff is also Amazon best-selling author of the book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. Jeff, it's great to see you again.
Hey, great to see you, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Share, if you will, with those joining us today, why longevity actually affects how you do financial planning work for clients that are members of the income generation.
Well, first of all, Dave, longevity can be one of the biggest misconceptions where folks make the biggest mistakes in retirement because they actually get it backwards. When they retire, they think they need to have a huge sum of money, but we also have to have a huge sum of money at the end of our life expectancy because that's when our healthcare needs are going to be the biggest. And so that's the misconception, Dave. However, you've talked about being an income specialist, and you have some really cool pilot analogies that you like to utilize. So why don't you explain what those are?
Well, it's probably my favorite one is the fact that if you're flying an airplane at 1,000 feet, the horizon is less than 40 miles away. That's as far as you could see land on a clear day. But if you're flying at 30,000 feet, the horizon is over 200 miles away, essentially almost 6 times as much. And a true income specialist is essentially flying at 30,000 feet, whereas most advisors, unfortunately, are stuck at 1,000 feet. But here's the question I have for you. Why do you think that most people tend to underestimate the impact of future healthcare costs?
Well, Dave, it's simple rule. It's inflation. I mean, in 24 years, your healthcare costs are going to be triple what they are today. How do you prepare for that? What do you have to do to make sure that you're going to have some money down the line to take care of yourself? Because that's an issue. You know, most financial industry professionals say it's okay to liquidate assets for income, Dave, in retirement to cover those costs. But what kind of foresight is that? What's another way that utilizes the income model that protects you against the dangers of healthcare inflation?
Well, the income model, as you know, in and of itself does protect because by definition, with that Ask Dave just a moment ago, if essentially you're preserving your principal, living off just your interest and dividends, then by definition, your principal's intact in the future for healthcare expenses. But the thing that really complicates this, though, is that many of us are part of the sandwich generation. While we're trying to plan for retirement, we're caring for parents and oftentimes caring for children. And this is something we're going to talk about coming up right after the break. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on the income generation. I'm David Scranton. During my career, I found that most baby boomers have done a great job growing their retirement savings, yet many don't know how to convert their savings into steady income. And that is why I built the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans preserve their assets and establish steady streams of income.
If you're 55 or older, our free Retirement Income Kit is for you. It's chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-710-1749, online at theretirementinComeStore.com.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and thanks for being with us today. So far, we've talked about one of the trickiest challenges of our generation, and that's the fact that we live so long. But now let's talk about another one of the unique challenges facing our generation, the income generation, and that is the ever-rising cost of healthcare. It's also a challenge that many people tend to underestimate. So consider, if you will, that since 1948, that is the second year of the baby boom, the price of medical care has grown at an average annual rate of 5.3%. That's 50% higher than the regular rate of inflation based upon the CPI index. So do the math. And you realize that healthcare and medical costs are basically doubling every 12 to 14 years. And here's just one potential danger that comes with rising healthcare costs. Let's say if you're in your 60s today, you may figure that $150,000 to $200,000 a year is enough to cover the cost of full-time home health care if you needed it. And this is based upon current rates. However, when you factor in healthcare inflation, by the time you actually need that in-home care, that yearly cost may have risen to somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000 per year. So it's important to have a plan that anticipates these challenges over a full 30 years and helps you prepare for them. Now, complicating matters even further is another challenge related to longevity, and that is the fact that many Americans nearing retirement are also caring for an aging parent. Now, some are providing care directly, others from a distance. In either case, though, it often creates a financial burden. And even when it doesn't, it can keep you so focused on your parents' needs that you may end up neglecting your own. And if you're like a lot of people, you may also have grown children that you're still helping out in some way financially. So here's the bottom line. The burdens of the so-called sandwich generation are especially widespread in the income generation. In fact, in some worst-case scenarios, Americans in their 50s and 60s are even bankrupting their own retirement accounts to help out parents and children. And even worse, they're doing it with absolutely no backup plan for their own financial security, even 10 years down the road, let alone 30 years. Now, this is a tough situation, not just financially, but also emotionally, right? Obviously, we all love our parents, we all love our children, and we don't ever want to think of them as being a burden. But we also don't want to burden them. And this highlights yet another reason why having the right retirement plan is so incredibly important. And that is so your kids won't have to worry about your financial security when they get to be your age. Now it's time to field another Ask Dave question from the field. Tom from Florida asks, Dave, how much help can I expect from Medicare when it comes to keeping up with healthcare inflation? Well, that's a great question, and Medicare is one of the most misunderstood topics. So bottom line is you'll get help when it comes to costs for doctor's visit. You'll get help with inflation when it comes to hospital stays. But where it falls short is it doesn't provide any benefits for full-time home health care, or virtually no benefits, or only short-term, and doesn't really provide any benefits for convalescent care other than extremely short-term. And typically doesn't do anything to cover prescription drug costs. Those are things that you need to plan for on your own. So Tom, great question, and thanks for contributing. Now be sure to submit your own questions to Ask Dave by emailing me at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. Now let's bring back in my good friend, Jeff Small. So Jeff, in your personal experience, how often do you see clients struggling in some way or another with this sandwich generation issue?
You know, Dave, we've seen it more often than not. And what happens is, and I've had my own experience in this, if you're taking care of your mother or father and you're supporting them financially and you have children, you are officially in the sandwich generation. So not only do you have to take care of them, but you got to plan for yourself. The one thing though, Dave, I always stress, and I know you do too, is how important it is for families to talk about these challenges openly. Because not all the kids will toe the line here and help their parents.
Yeah, it's up to mom and dad. Kids don't want to talk about mom and dad's longevity, but they have to. So it's up for the parents to really take that role and to schedule a family meeting. And although the conversation starts slow and is difficult and sludgy, when it gets rolling, the children are always thankful that mom and dad had the guts to bring that issue up. But also these meetings, I find, tend to be good motivators for people to start taking action. And sometimes that means getting help from the right professional.
There's no doubt that it does, Dave. The right professional is the key term. And normally an elder care advocate is what a family has to tap into. However, when it comes to money, an income specialist is who they should be accessing because they focus on asset protection, reliable income, which is what those folks need at that stage of their growth, at that stage of their life, not growth. But of course, all of this may have been less challenging for our own parents or grandparents, Dave, because the generation that took care of their own in some ways might have a sizable pension that they could count on, but as we know now, pensions are extinct as a form of retirement income. So we must create our own pensions now, Dave.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. In fact, in our next segment, we're going to talk about pensions and then the level to which defined benefit pensions, those typical traditional pensions that pay you a monthly income every month for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live, why those are going the way of the dodo bird and what you need to do to protect yourself. But before that, I want to bring in a good friend of mine and Jeff's, our next guest, David Stearns, founder and president of Stearns Retirement Group, a retirement income store located outside of Athens, Georgia. Dave, it's so great to have you back here with us on the Income Generation.
Thank you, Dave. I'm glad to be here.
So Dave, it's great to see you. Our business as financial advisors is really a great microcosm of studying psychology and psychology related to finance. Tell us, though, in your infinite wisdom and experiences, which one of your retired clients are happiest and unhappiest and why?
Oh, Jeff, that's a great question. You know, I've observed for 22 years, I've had a front row seat in working just with retirees, and I've seen people come in who have great big pensions and not a lot of accumulation. And I can contrast them to people that come and see me that just the opposite. They don't really have any guaranteed sources of income outside of Social Security, but they've got a lot of accumulation. And I can tell you that the folks that already have the income puzzle solved through the old-fashioned pensions, along with Social Security and not much to invest, they're happier. And so that's what really has caused me to really focus on helping people create their own pensions, if you will, from their own investments through lifetime income.
So really, it's the responsibility of the pre-retiree or retiree to find out how they can create, maybe, as you would call it, their own private form of a pension by creating income, correct?
Absolutely correct, Jeff. Yeah. And a lot of times they don't realize it. A lot of times, I think maybe because of our industry has kind of been one-sided for growth for a long time. And so they don't oftentimes realize it's really possible to create sort of their own private pension from investing properly, but I have to help them uncover it and see it.
Yeah. Now, David, you have a unique background that most financial advisors don't have, and that's for many years you owned a home healthcare business. Tell us, how did your experiences in owning that business affect now how you work with people as a financial advisor?
Well, one of the things I guess that I learned 7 years in owning that company is that it takes a whole lot of income to pay. Really, I wasn't the home health care. I was the home care, meaning private duty caregiving. And so people that pay for private duty caregiving, maybe $24, $25 an hour, it's paid for from private funds, not Medicare. So they've got to have enough income, or they've got to have some insurance to pay for it, all of which is paying for it privately. So it really helps me in my planning cases today to not ignore that risk and to help people realize it's even another reason why you got to have good income now and into the future, because paying for care is real.
And like you said before, those people with traditional pension plans now are becoming fewer and further between. And that's something we're going to talk about coming up in just a moment, right after the break. And we'll have income specialist James Locke joining us also. So stay with us. We'll be back with more on the Income Generation.
For behind-the-scenes photos, retirement planning tips, and upcoming giveaways, follow the Income Generation Show on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch video clips, guest interviews, and to catch up on past episodes.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and it's great to be here with all y'all today. So far, we've talked about a few of the unique challenges that we face as members of the Income Generation. Things like longevity and the ever-rising cost of healthcare inflation. But here's another challenge that we're facing, and that is the loss of traditional pension plans. You see, in their glory years, pensions actually were a vital part of the culture at most companies, and they were often a major recruiting and retention tool. Your father or grandfather may have worked at a certain company his entire career, mainly because of his pension plan. However, you don't need me to tell you that times have changed. In fact, in the last 20 years, the percentage of Fortune 500 companies that offer a traditional pension plan has dropped, now get this, from 59% to just 16%, according to at least one study. Pension plan freezes and payout offers have also risen during this time. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 4% of American workers today have access to a traditional defined benefit pension plan. So what if you're in that 4%? Well, even if you are, your pension may not be as reliable of an income source as your father's or grandfather's was. So the question becomes, why did pensions go the way of the dodo bird? And what does it mean for the income generation? Well, the fact is that pensions remained popular until the 1980s. That's when interest rates started to decline overall. And this trend meant that employers had to start making larger and larger deposits into pension funds to cover these liabilities. Now, at about the same time, mutual funds were also becoming popular. And as a result, employers saw a way to pass the liability for retirement accounts to their workers through self-funded plans like 401ks. To explain that in more detail, please consider the basic differences between a pension and a 401k. Both provide a means of saving for retirement, but the way they accrue money differs in two ways: who owns the risk and who has the responsibility of managing the investments. With a pension, obviously the employer pays into a pool of money. Then the employer invests that money in hopes that it grows enough to pay you a defined benefit when you retire. If it doesn't grow fast enough, the investment money will fall short of the defined benefit, in which case your boss is the one who's on the hook to pay the difference out of companies' profits. And that's exactly why most businesses were eager to shift from these old-fashioned retirement programs to 401ks, because it shifts most of the risk away from the company and puts it on you. See, the onus is now squarely on your shoulders to manage and to make decisions about your own account, and to hope that it keeps growing during your prime working years. Now, granted, most companies try to make this process easier by automatically enrolling new workers and matching contributions. But typically, the default contribution amounts are small, often averaging about 3%. And that means that it's up to you to decide to invest more, which again takes the risk and liability away from the boss and puts it on you. So now it's time to take another question from you. It's Evan from Connecticut. Evan says, Dave, a common belief that people have is if the stock market's doing well, then my 401k plan is doing well and vice versa. Is it really that simple? Well, great question, Evan. And it is and it isn't. It's a vast overgeneralization because fees that are often hidden inside 401ks can erode the return. So the market can look like it's doing this, but perhaps you're yielding a lot less. Also, it depends what part of the market you're on. The last year has been a great example. With this whole stay-at-home recovery, the S&P 500, the index, has done really well. But why is it done well? Because 25% of it was in FANG stocks that really benefited from the stay-at-home technologies. If you take those out of the mix, the stock market didn't do nearly as well. So if you're in a mutual fund in your 401k that didn't have a lot of those technology stocks, you could see the market having a rapid recovery, but your money may not be having nearly as rapid a recovery. So again, great question, Evan, and be sure to submit your own questions to Ask Dave by emailing me at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. And now it's time to bring back in our good friend, Jeff Small. So Jeff, is this cultural shift from pensions to 401ks, in your personal opinion, is it all bad, or is there a silver lining here?
I think there's a silver lining, Dave, because it forces people to take responsibility for their own money. The companies don't pay you a pension anymore, so if you started saving early enough, you'll prefer the freedom and transparency of a 401k because you can move it from company to company. But on top of that, Dave, 401ks and similar plans seem extremely reliable back in the day because their founding is synonymous with a hugely beneficial time period in our investing history. And that investing history is what, Dave?
Well, I guess you're referring to the 80s and 90s, right? The best bull market we've ever had in history. And you're right, during that period, 401ks could have performed better than defined benefit pension plans. But we've got to remember that the 80s and 90s might be a one-time event. We may never see a period quite like that again. But what I find is that people in their 60s and 70s today were in their prime working years during the 80s and 90s. And as a result, that's the prime savings and investing years. And what it's done is it's permanently affected how they think about investing.
It does. And, investors are still stuck in the 90s, and so are advisors, Dave. So what we see is a constant repeating itself with new people that we meet for the first time from the income generation. They have money in growth and money in cash, and there's no in between. There's no plan for income. There's no dividends. Both of these allocations have the same problem at this stage of the market cycle, Dave. But of course, risk has a lot to do with another challenge that you mentioned at the top of the show: how the financial markets have changed so dramatically since the turn of the century.
Well, I want to keep it a secret here for the next segment of the show, Jeff, but well, you know what? I'm not good at keeping secrets, so here it is. Bottom line is the Federal Reserve has permanently changed the volatility in the market for the worse. Something which we're going to talk about right after the break. But before we get to that break, let's introduce our next guest, James Locke. He's the founder of Pool Locke Associates in Wilmington, Delaware. James has been in the financial industry for over 20 years. And James, being a good personal friend of myself and Jeff's, it's really great to have you here with us today.
Hey guys, love to be here.
So James, tell us why you became an income specialist.
Jeff, I started off my career as an options trader, and that was fast-paced and exciting. But people would always come to me and ask, hey, what should I do with my retirement? I was young, I never really knew, but I knew there had to be an answer. And then through education and shows like this, we learned income is that answer, and I went down that path to really focus on income to help people in retirement.
Great answer, James. Why don't you tell us why income is the right choice for retirement and how you convey that to your customers?
Well, when you move into retirement, you're lowering your volatility in the future, right? You know that you're going to have enough income for not just your needs, but for your wants. And we try and go through that with all our clients here so that they know that their future is as secure as it can be because income is much more predictable.
So what is the biggest retirement planning mistake that you'd like to take this opportunity to, in a public forum, to coach our income generation members on avoiding?
And the biggest problem that we always see here is people are just sitting on their hands, right? They're saying, well, maybe just a little bit longer, or I'll just wait, or, say the market's going to go up or something along those lines. And they're sitting on their hands waiting. Well, if you take action now, then you don't have to worry about your future. Don't wait. Don't think it's going to be better in the future. Focus on today and move into that income plan, and then you know that your retirement will be safer in the future.
James, as usual, great advice. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks, guys.
And coming up after the break, we'll talk about another challenge we're facing as members of the income generation, and that's the economic uncertainty the Federal Reserve has created with quantitative easing. And joining us will be income specialist David Wright. We'll be right back here on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. When it came time for my mom to retire, one simple mistake forced her to work years longer than she should have. And that's why I started the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans 55 and over plan for the retirement they deserve. I couldn't help my mom, but maybe I can help you.
If you're 55 or older, please claim our free Retirement Income Kit. Chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-314-7227. Online at theretirementincomestore.com.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and it's great to have you all with us today. I want to take all of you on a trip down memory lane right now. So imagine this. It was the late 1990s, and I was a young financial advisor doing some independent research. And at that time, I discovered something that would change the course of my career and my life. My research told me that everyday investors of a certain age were about to face a huge challenge, and that is a seismic shift in the financial markets. I saw it coming in the form of the bursting of the dot-com bubble, and therefore this 2000 to 2002 market drop. However, I also knew that that was only just the beginning, because I felt like another major crash would follow in less than a decade. And it did, with the 2007 to 2009 correction that was kicked off by the financial crisis. What I could never have foreseen, however, is the extent to which the Federal Reserve would use artificial stimulus to try to rebuild the market and to try to rebuild the economy after that second crash. I also couldn't predict the extent to which other central banks would follow our bad example, essentially by injecting their own economies with enormous amounts of economic steroids. In fact, as we speak, the Fed is once again engaged in quantitative easing, supposedly as a way to help us recover from the coronavirus recession. But here's the reality. The Fed has been using some level of quantitative easing almost constantly since 2009. And as a result, we now have a stock market and an economy that in many ways are fundamentally disconnected. And what I mean by that is that one is no longer a good indicator or an accurate indicator of the other. In fact, speaking more broadly about it, what all this economic steroid abuse has done is essentially usher in a new age of economic uncertainty and has created another unique challenge for the income generation. You know, we've all seen the old magician's trick, right? Where he levitates a woman and he runs a hoop over the body to show her that there's nothing supporting her, right? Well, in a sense, the modern day stock market is somewhat like that woman, magically levitating without the fundamental support that it traditionally has had. Yes, there are still some real forces driving the markets. There's no doubt that in just 1 year since the start of the coronavirus, yes, our economy has made an impressive comeback. However, the question becomes, was it impressive enough to justify new record stock market highs in less than a year? The question becomes, are gung-ho investors really focused on this economy and its long-term strength? Or alternatively, are they laser focused on all this new artificial stimulus? Many think that the answer is option B. And so do many economists. And what's more, many predict a painful reckoning is in store for all this unchecked artificial tinkering over the course of the years. So is that inevitable? Well, not necessarily inevitable, but it does give today's generation of retirees and near retirees another unique challenge when it comes to retirement planning. A challenge that a qualified income specialist can help you tackle head on. Now it's time to take one last question from you. Kevin from Florida says, Dave, if the stock market is disconnected from reality, like you say, what would it take to reconnect it? Another big crash? Well, to put it simply, it takes one of two things. Either another big crash, bringing multiples in the stock market down, or perhaps a long, gradual unwinding of quantitative easing that somehow brings valuations back in line, but does it without spooking the markets. And that's difficult to do because all this quantitative easing is essentially one huge laboratory experiment that's unprecedented. And sometimes when you do an experiment in a laboratory, you get a great result. And other times you get an explosion. And only time is going to tell, Kevin, which happens with this particular economic experiment. Thanks for asking. Now, be sure to submit your own questions to Ask Dave. How? By emailing me at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. Now, let's bring back in our good friend, Jeff Small. Now, Jeff, I'm sure you have clients who were hit hard by those two corrections I talked about from 2000 to 2013. And of course, I mean, before you became their advisor.
Ha, you're funny. But that's a real issue, Dave, because when the markets dropped in the last two corrections, to recover they had to wait years or stop spending. Had they invested for income and the market dropped, it really wouldn't have mattered because that income would have continued, while the alternative would be to wait several years to recover their losses, their market losses, Dave. So we just went through this market drop last year, Dave, a major drop of almost 40% when the coronavirus hit last March. What made that one different?
Well, the fact that it dropped almost 40% and it recovered essentially within 5 months. 5 months, Jeff. I mean, think about that. That is just crazy. And again, it's in large part because all the tinkering with the Federal Reserve and Congress, that was literally unprecedented. So if our viewers, our listeners don't want to weather that type of drop again, they can essentially do so by focusing less on the stock market and a little bit more on this thing that you and I often refer to as bonds and bond-like instruments. Can you explain why in just a few words for our audience?
Well, the word bond market or bonds and volatility don't usually occur in the same sentence, Dave. The whole point of investing in bonds is to escape volatility. However, occasionally, as we saw last year, even the bond market can be volatile. But bond investing is a contract, and that contract has a guarantee in it that is based on the solvency of a corporation. You know, if we look back in history, Dave, bonds were the safest asset class during the Great Depression, and even now provide consistent income and more stability than the over-bloated stock market. But Dave, we've also talked before about there being a potential upside to stock market volatility for certain income investors, right?
Right. Well, I'm glad you used the word certain because at the end of the day, it's all a question of risk tolerance. And it assumes that members of the income generation, if they're going to invest in the stock market, they do it with a high dividend-oriented, value-oriented strategy. Okay? So if you have the right risk tolerance, absolutely the volatility can be your friend because it gives you an opportunity to get some growth along with a competitive dividend, along with a competitive income stream. And that's where I'd like to turn just a bit and bring in our final guest today, David Wright, president of Wright Financial Group, a retirement income store located in Toledo, Ohio. Dave, it's good to have a great friend of the income generation, myself, and Jeff Small on the show today. Thanks for being back with us.
Dave, great to be back.
So Dave, how do you explain the shift that's needed when people start to retire from growth to income? How do you make that transition?
Well, a lot of people simply don't know what I'm even talking about. They know that for the last 30 or 40 years, they've been building their assets and kind of oblivious to what's happening in the market because they're basically buying in every week, every month out of their paycheck. But when they come to see me, either because of COVID or they're just getting older, they're ready to start utilizing their funds. And that's when they start realizing, you know, maybe selling shares out of my portfolio is not the best solution moving forward. Something gut instinct tells a lot of them there needs to be some sort of a shift in how they take money from the account. And what the surprising thing is, Jeff, most of them don't realize there are investments, things that focus more on income than growth, in just growth in the stock market and taking your chances every day.
Yeah, so Dave, what do you do when somebody comes to you and they seem overly confident that they've saved enough money for retirement and they're not looking at income, they're just looking at it as a pile and it's enough? How do you get them to make that paradigm shift philosophically?
Very, very quickly and easily, because I used to be on the growth side of the equation. And I think that's why I became an income specialist, because it doesn't matter how much money you have unless you're, Warren Buffett. If you you think enough money, it can quickly be eroded by, longevity risk, by inflation risk. And the fact that once you start drawing money from retirement, if you're not set up to just draw income from dividends and interest, and you're just using shares or engineering your income every month to take money out, you can shrink $1 million pretty darn quickly. I know a gal named Ellen. She came to my office I think in 2013, she was referred to me, and she hadn't done any of the planning in the past, but her husband had passed away. She took over the balance, and the advisor used this 4% rule to draw from her accounts, but it was all in the S&P 500. That million, using the 4% rule, invested in the S&P 500 index, was under $500,000 in just 6 years by the time she got to me. So it's not hard to communicate why it's important to use your investments for income, have income sources, not anti-stock market, but I'm pro-income because I've seen it happen firsthand.
Sure. And the only way to use the 4% rule for sure is to make sure you're getting a 4% interest or dividend yield. Dave, thanks so much for being back with us on the Income Generation. It's been fun as usual. And thank you for joining me here on the show. And thanks to Jeff Small as well as all of our guests today. We've had a blast. Bottom line, if you're close to or you're in retirement and you're concerned about your money, it's essential you stay informed and up to date. And as you know, right here is where you can do it on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you next week.